The air inside the cave is thin, sharp, and carries the distinct biting chill of a world still gripped by the tail end of an ice age. If you press your hand against the limestone wall, the surface is slick with a fine film of condensation, a cold dampness that seeps into your skin and makes the fine hairs on your arms stand at attention. There is a faint metallic tang in the air, the smell of freshly knapped flint, mixed with the heavy grounding scent of damp earth and wood smoke that has permeated every crack in the rock. You are standing less than 3 feet away from a man who lived 30,000 years ago. He is breathing steadily, his chest moving under a heavy wrap of cured bison hide, and you are waiting for the inevitable. You are waiting for the stench. We have been told for centuries that this moment would be unbearable, that the sheer olfactory assault of an unwashed ancient human would be enough to make a modern person gag. We imagine a thick, rancid cloud of sulfur, rotting meat, and sour sweat. It is one of the most persistent facts we hold about our ancestors, that they were by any modern standard absolutely filthy. But as you stand there in the cold, damp dark, something strange happens. The expected wall of odor never hits you. There is a scent, certainly, but it isn't what you think. And this raises a mystery that has quietly obsessed evolutionary biologists and anthropologists for decades. If ancient humans didn't have soap, deodorant, or hot showers, why don't the records of our biology support the idea that they were walking biohazards? Why does the evidence suggest our mental image of the stinky caveman might be a complete fabrication? But if the smell wasn't an eye-watering rot, what was it actually? To solve this mystery, we have to start with a forensic look at the crime scene, the human skin. For a long time, the investigation into body odor was stalled because we were looking at the wrong suspect. We blamed sweat. It makes sense on the surface. You exercise, you get sweaty, and then you start to smell. But as researchers at the University of York recently proved, sweat is a red herring. In a landmark 2020 study led by Dr. Michelle Rudden and Dr. Ian Armitage, scientists finally isolated the true culprit. They discovered a specific bioenzyme produced by a bacteria called Staphylococcus hominis. Here is the twist. Sweat itself is almost entirely odorless. It is a sterile mixture of water, salts, and proteins. If you could collect fresh sweat in a vacuum, it would have no more scent than a glass of tap water. The smell only happens when this specific enzyme breaks down odorless molecules in our sweat into pungent chemicals called thioalcohols. These thioalcohols are incredibly potent. We're talking about a detection threshold of 1 part per billion. To your nose, they smell like onions, sulfur, or a leaky gas pipe. This discovery was the first major break in the case. It meant that ancient human smell wasn't determined by how much they sweated, but by which bacteria were living on their skin and how much food those bacteria were being given. And this leads us to a startling realization. The bacteria that make us smell today are not the same bacteria that lived on our ancestors. But how could a different time and a different world change the very microbes living on a person's armpit? This brings us to our second clue, the modern stink paradox. We often assume that because we wash more, we smell better. But the science of the skin microbiome suggests that our modern hygiene habits might actually be making our natural odor more offensive. When you use harsh surfactants, the soaps and body washes found in every modern bathroom, you are essentially conducting a scorched earth policy on your skin. You strip away the slow-growing, neutral-smelling bacteria and leave behind an ecological vacuum. The first microbes to move back into that empty space are often the fast-growing, aggressive, odor-producing species like the Staphylococcus hominis we just mentioned. Ancient humans didn't have this problem. They lived in a state of bacterial equilibrium. Their skin was covered in a diverse, stable, old-growth forest of microbes that had been passed down from mother to child for millions of years. Research on modern hunter-gatherer groups, like the Hadza of Tanzania or the Yanomami of the Amazon, shows that their skin microbiomes are vastly more diverse than those of people in New York or London. In these traditional communities, the bacteria that produce the sharp, sulfurous notes of modern body odor are often kept in check by other, more neutral species. It is a biological check and balance system that we have traded for a bottle of Irish Spring. But even with a balanced microbiome, wouldn't the lack of a shower eventually lead to a buildup of something unpleasant? That question leads us to investigate the dietary evidence, which is perhaps the most overlooked part of the entire mystery. The thioalcohols that make us smell like onions and rotten eggs are produced when bacteria process specific compounds in our sweat. And those compounds are directly influenced by what we put in our mouths. Modern humans consume a diet that is historically unprecedented. We eat massive amounts of refined sugars, processed carbohydrates, and dairy, things that were either rare or non-existent for the vast majority of human history. These foods change our metabolic byproducts. When you eat a diet high in processed sugar, it alters the chemical composition of your perspiration, providing a high-octane fuel source for the most pungent bacteria on your skin. In contrast, the ancient human diet was lean, high in fiber, and completely devoid of processed additives. A 2006 study published in the journal Chemical Senses tested this exact theory. Researchers had a group of men eat a high-meat, low-processed diet for 2 weeks, and another group eat a typical modern diet. Women were then asked to rate the attractiveness and intensity of the men's body odor. The results were consistent. The men on the cleaner, more ancestral diet were rated as having a significantly less intense and more pleasant scent. Our ancestors weren't just eating differently, they were producing a different kind of sweat altogether. But if diet and bacteria were only half the story, could the very blueprint of our bodies hold the final answer? This is where the investigation takes a turn into the deep history of our DNA, and we encounter the secret of the ABCC11 gene. This is a specific gene that determines two very different things: what kind of earwax you have, and whether or not you produce the chemical precursors for body odor. If you have the dry earwax version of this gene, your body simply does not produce the specific sweat compounds that bacteria turn into stink. You are effectively a genetic anomaly who cannot smell bad in the traditional sense. This gene is found in nearly 100% of East Asian populations and a significant portion of other global groups. When geneticists like Dr. Toshihisa Ishikawa tracked the history of this gene, they found it was a relatively recent evolutionary adaptation, likely appearing about 40,000 years ago as humans moved into colder climates. But the existence of this gene proves a massive point. For tens of thousands of years, large portions of the human population were walking around with a built-in deodorant encoded in their very cells. Even for those who didn't have this specific mutation, the variability of human scent was a major factor in survival. In a world where a predator could catch your scent from a mile away, being the smelly one wasn't just a social faux pas, it was a death sentence for you and your entire tribe. But if evolution was trying to keep us quiet and scentless, how did our ancestors manage the smell they did have when they went out to hunt? The mystery deepens when we look at the hunter's cloak. If you talk to modern hunters who use traditional methods, they will tell you that the human smell is the single most difficult obstacle to overcome. A deer or a bison can detect a human being long before they see or hear them. This suggests that ancient humans must have been masters of scent management. And the archaeological record gives us a stunning clue in the form of red ochre. For over 100,000 years, humans have been obsessed with this iron-rich earth. We see it at the Blombos Cave in South Africa and in Neanderthal sites across Europe. While we often think of ochre as body paint for ritual or decoration, modern chemical analysis reveals a more practical function. Ochre is a powerful antibacterial agent. It dries out the skin and inhibits the growth of the very bacteria that create body odor. By coating their bodies in ochre and animal fats, ancient humans weren't just painting themselves. They were creating a sophisticated, long-lasting barrier that served as a primitive deodorant and insect repellent. They also used smoke, not just as a byproduct of sitting near a fire, but as a deliberate tool. Smoke is a natural disinfectant. It kills microbes and replaces the human scent with the neutral, earthy smell of charred wood, a scent that is ubiquitous in nature and doesn't trigger a danger response in prey animals. So, the ancient human didn't smell like an unwashed gym bag. They smelled like the forest itself. But if they were masking their scent for the hunt, what were they doing for each other? We have to look at the social grooming lead to understand the internal dynamics of the tribe. In our modern world, we use soap to distance ourselves from our own biology. We want to be a blank slate. But for ancient humans, smell was a vital communication channel. This is the concept of olfactory data. Your body odor carries incredibly dense information about your health, your stress levels, and your reproductive status. Researchers have found that humans can actually smell fear and disgust on other people through chemosignals in sweat. In a small, tight-knit band of hunter-gatherers, being able to smell that a tribe member was falling ill or was under high stress was a crucial survival advantage. The tribe didn't want you to be scentless, they wanted you to be readable. Social grooming, the act of picking through hair and cleaning skin, wasn't just about removing lice. It was a way to maintain this communication channel. It kept the noise of dirt and excess oils down, so the signal of the body's natural state could be heard. They weren't living in filth. They were living in a state of high-definition sensory awareness. We know this because of the way their brains were wired to process the world. But did their brains perceive the same stink that ours do? This leads us to the Neanderthal receptor mystery. In 2014, researchers at Duke University and the Cleveland Museum of Natural History decided to see how our ancestors actually perceived smells. They focused on a receptor called OR7D4, which detects a specific chemical in sweat called androstenone. To some modern humans, androstenone smells like sweet vanilla or wood. To others, it smells like foul, stale urine. By sequencing the DNA of Neanderthals and Denisovans, the researchers were able to rebuild their odor receptors in a lab. They found that these ancient cousins likely perceived the world very differently than we do. They were potentially more sensitive to certain environmental smells and less bothered by the musky sense of the human body. This suggests that the very concept of smelling terrible is a cultural construct that has changed as our brains have evolved. What we call a stink today might have been a comforting, familiar home smell to someone 30,000 years ago. It's like the difference between the smell of a farm to a city dweller and the farmer who lives there. To one, it's an assault. To the other, it's the smell of life and productivity. But if their sense of smell was so different, what happens when the two worlds collide? There is a fascinating and somewhat humbling reverse observation that comes from early colonial accounts and modern anthropological studies. When people from civilized soap-using cultures first encountered isolated indigenous groups, they often wrote about how much the natives smelled. But we rarely hear the other side of the story. In many cases, the indigenous people found the smell of the Europeans to be absolutely repulsive. They describe the newcomers as smelling like corpses or sour milk. This is because the European diet, heavy in dairy and salt, combined with the use of lye soaps and perfumes, created a chemical profile that was totally alien and deeply unpleasant to people living on a natural diet. Even today, researchers living with tribes like the Hadza report that after a few weeks, their own modern smell starts to bother them. They begin to prefer the scent of the camp, the wood smoke, the wild honey, the earthy musk of the people, over the artificial chemical scent of their own deodorants and shampoos. It turns out that we aren't the ones with the neutral, correct smell. We are the outliers. We are the ones who smell like a laboratory. But if we are the ones who smell strange, where does that leave the caveman in our mystery? The verdict of our investigation is becoming clear. The image of the stinking ancient human is a myth born out of a fundamental misunderstanding of biology, diet, and environment. Our ancestors didn't smell like us on a bad day. They didn't have the BO enzyme working overtime on a sugar-rich diet. They didn't have a skin microbiome that had been decimated by surfactants. They weren't walking around in a cloud of their own waste. Instead, they were part of a complex, balanced olfactory ecosystem. They smelled of the fires they sat beside, the plants they crushed against their skin to stay hidden from the wind, the red earth they used for protection, and the lean, clean metabolic output of a body in peak physical condition. They smelled like the world they lived in. And in that world, there was no such thing as terrible. There was only information. They were reading the air like a book, and their own scent was just one of the many characters in the story. They were clean in the ways that mattered for survival, and their odor was a badge of health and belonging. So we have to ask ourselves, when we look back at them from our sterilized, plastic-wrapped world, are we really the ones who have perfected the art of being human? Or have we just lost the ability to understand what a human actually smells like? This brings us back to the cold, damp cave where we started. The mystery of the smelly ancestor isn't a mystery of hygiene, it's a mystery of perspective. We have spent the last 100 years convinced that the natural human body is a problem to be solved with chemicals and fragrances. We have been taught to fear our own biology, to see every natural scent as a failure of civilization. But the deeper we look into the past, the more we see that our ancestors had it right. They didn't need to hide who they were, because who they were was perfectly adapted to the world around them. They were masters of their environment, and that included the environment of their own skin. They used the tools of the earth, smoke, ochre, water, and diet to manage their presence in a way that was both sophisticated and effective. They were not dirty people trying to be clean. They were biological beings living in harmony with a microbial world we are only just beginning to understand. The stench we project onto them is actually a reflection of our own modern imbalances. It is the smell of a species that has forgotten how to eat, how to live, and how to coexist with the very bacteria that make life possible. The investigation ends not with a confirmation of our biases, but with a challenge to them. When we ask if ancient humans smelled terrible, we are asking the wrong question. We should be asking why we have become so disconnected from the natural sense of our own kind. We should be asking why we find the smell of a forest fire or damp earth or a healthy human body so alien. Our ancestors were the peak of human evolution, survivors who thrived in conditions that would break a modern person in a week. They weren't failures of hygiene, they were triumphs of biology. And if we could truly step back into that cave and stand next to that man, we wouldn't find a monster, we would find a mirror. We would find a version of ourselves that was more attuned to the world, more capable, and perhaps, in a very real biological sense, much cleaner than we are today. The mystery is solved, but the implications are something we have to live with every time we pick up a bar of soap. Think about the way you smell right now. Not the scent of your shampoo or your laundry detergent, but the actual physical scent of your skin. If you were to stop using those products tomorrow, your body wouldn't revert to an ancient smell. It would go through a period of chaotic, pungent imbalance as the most aggressive bacteria fought for control of your skin. You would smell modern unwashed, which is a far cry from ancient natural. It takes months, sometimes years, for a skin microbiome to stabilize into something resembling our ancestral state. This is why our intuition about the past is so wrong. We only see the transitional mess, never the final balanced result. Our ancestors were already at the finish line. They had the balance we have lost. They were the masters of a sensory world that we can only glimpse through the lens of a microscope or the sequence of a genome. They were not the smelly ones. We are the ones who are hiding. So, as you step out of the cave and back into the modern world, keep that image of the limestone wall in your mind. Remember the cold, the damp, and the faint smell of ozone. Remember that the stench you were expecting was never there. It was just a story we told ourselves to feel superior to the people who built the foundation of everything we are. The truth is much more interesting, much more complex, and a lot more human. Our ancestors didn't smell like a problem to be solved. They smelled like a species that was exactly where it was supposed to be. And that is a scent that no amount of modern perfume can ever truly replicate. It is the smell of home, of survival, and of a history that is written in our very pores. Now, take a moment to look at the world around you. We live in a world designed to be scentless, yet we are surrounded by artificial fragrances meant to mimic the very things our ancestors lived amongst: pine, citrus, sea salt, wood smoke. We are obsessed with smelling like a world we no longer inhabit. Why do you think we are so drawn to these natural scents in our products while simultaneously trying to scrub our own natural biology away? Is it possible that on some deep subconscious level, we are still trying to find our way back to that cave? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Does the idea of a natural human smell change how you think about your daily routine? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden history of our bodies, consider subscribing. We're going to be looking at more of these obvious facts that turn out to be anything but. There is a whole world of mystery hiding in the things we take for granted. Let's go back to that limestone wall one last time. Feel the cold, damp rock under your fingertips again. That man in the cave, 30,000 years ago, isn't a stranger. He is your grandfather, 1,000 times removed, and as he breathes in the sharp Ice Age air, he isn't smelling a dirty tribe. He is smelling his family. He is smelling the health of his children and the safety of his home. If you stood there today, you wouldn't be repulsed. You would finally recognize the scent of a human being who hasn't been scrubbed into silence. You would realize that the stinking caveman was a lie we told ourselves to forget that we used to belong to the earth. And as you pull your hand away from that freezing wet stone, the most chilling thought of all isn't how he smelled to you. It's the realization that to him, in his world of wood smoke and red earth, you, with your chemicals, your sugars, and your sterilized skin, would be the one who smelled like something that wasn't quite alive. That is the definitive end of the mystery. He didn't smell terrible. He smelled like a survivor. We are the ones who smell like the end of the story.